Due to multiple copyright claims from Toho, a majority of this video will look like screenshots. Massive spoilers for episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 16 of Frieren. Time is something we're all aware that we're running out of. Time is inevitable. While we can predict the weather, defy physics to do the impossible and fly, create bridges spanning miles upon miles, tame beasts, and hold the power to destroy the very earth we stand on, time is the one thing that we can't control. Time doesn't care if you have plans or made your amends. No matter what we do, time will always tick by while we fade into the distance. This is the lesson a near-immortal elf learned the day her best friend died. Having lived for hundreds, if not thousands of years, Frieren took the time she had with others for granted. Or perhaps a better way to say it would be, she was never able to comprehend how others around her viewed time. After going on a 10-year expedition to slay the demon lord with her party, an expedition fraught with danger, excitement, joy, and sorrow, while her partners celebrate their lifelong bond when they return to the safety of the kingdom, knowing they've brought peace and prosperity to the world, all Frieren can think to say is,
our adventure was a mere 10 years.
While she holds some form of value in those 10 years, she doesn't understand what all the fuss is about. 10 years is only a 10th of a century, a 1,000th of Frieren's life. A life, I should add, that she's only in her prime. To Frieren, she has many, many more adventures ahead of her. She has many more chances to bond and make more memories with these people. Memories that will last her a lifetime. And she plans to act on this. She makes plans with them. Plans to see a meteor shower. 50 years from their current points in time. 50 years. It's impossible to think where I, my family, my friends, or the world will be in 50 years. We can make predictions, hopes that we'll be living our best lives, that through the odds we were able to make our greatest dreams come true. Perhaps we found someone we could finally settle down with. Maybe we had some kids, and maybe those kids had kids, and we're able to sit back in our rocking chairs, swaying back and forth as we enjoy retirement in our golden years. 50 years. As a statement, it doesn't sound that bad. When looking at the history of the world, 50 years is nothing. World War II was only 80 years ago. It's already been over 100 years since World War I, and hell, the United States is barely 250 years old. That's just a speck on the timeline. Put into perspective, 50 years is nothing, and yet a whole life can start and end in that time. And so Frieren goes on her way, spending a couple decades there and a couple decades over here, returning 50 years later on the dot to see her old friends. And I have to put emphasis on the word old here. Himmel, who used to be spry and full of life, athletic and regarded as one of the greatest heroes the world has ever seen, with hair that would make any stylist jealous, has been reduced to a short, bald, old man who struggles to walk. The one thing that time hasn't taken away from him is his spirit. So reuniting with her elderly party, the elf makes good on her promise and takes them to see a magnificent meteor shower, creating yet another moment in her life that she was present in. A few days later, the hero Himmel dies. Death is the one aspect of life that we can always count on. Living for over 1,000 years, I can't imagine how many people Frieren has had to say goodbye to, or knowing her, found out they died while reading a history book. After a millennia of experiencing those around her blinking out of existence, it should come to no one's surprise that Frieren's reaction to Himmel's death is cold and callous, as if she didn't care about the late hero. Civilians whose lives have been changed for the better because of Himmel's heroics in his youth look upon Frieren and label her heartless, but they can't understand what it means to live forever, having to experience connection and loss over and over while the world continues to move on. Frieren's lack of emotion makes sense because that's the type of life she lives. That is until...
Why didn't I try to better know and understand you?
Much like everyone else in his life, Himmel's existence was able to reach deep down and touch a part of Frieren that absolutely shook her to her core. She cries as he's buried, wishing that she could have spent more time with him than just a measly decade, wishing that she could have gotten to know him better. Because the thing is, the time was right in front of her. Those 50 years she spent away from him, from her entire party, were spent doing nothing. Sure, she went around, visiting towns and villages and expanding her view of the world, but it wasn't something that needed to be done. Had she understood how short Himmel's life truly is when compared to her own, perhaps she would have come to visit once or twice every few years instead of once every 50. But one of the harshest lessons that we often learn is that we don't know just how precious someone or something is to us until they're gone. And with the hero dead, the plot kicks off as Frieren seeks to avenge him, working through her despair and depression in a story that allows her to find justice for her fallen friend. Or that's how other stories would handle this. The thing is, Himmel wasn't killed by a monster in the woods or a demon seeking revenge for their fallen lord. It wasn't an accident that could have been prevented if Frieren had been paying more attention, nor was it in any way Frieren's fault. Himmel just dies. And that's a fact we all have to accept. The next time we see Frieren is 20 years after Himmel's death, and to be honest, it doesn't look like much has changed for her. She goes to visit Heiter, a man who has aged much more gracefully than Himmel, but who is still in his final years. She wishes to repay any debt she owes him before he joins Himmel. Heiter asks her to decipher a book that would potentially extend his life, as well as train a young girl he had taken in the arts of magic. Years go by in the blink of an eye, and now this young girl has entered her teenage years, and the once mobile, corrupt priest is on death's door. Frieren apologizes for not finding a spell to ward off death in the grimoire Heiter had asked her to decipher, only for the priest to reveal his final trick. Over the course of their time together, Frieren has acknowledged the young girl Heiter has taken in as a proper mage, and Heiter can now ask Frieren to take Fern under her wing so that they both will have someone after he is gone. He asks Frieren to leave on that very night, so that Fern doesn't have to say goodbye to anyone else ever again. But this is where we can start to see the most obvious hints of how Himmel has affected her. She begins to cry for her friend who is bedridden in front of her, telling him that instead of pushing Fern away, a girl who is practically his surrogate daughter and he her father, they should be spending as much time together and making as many memories as time permits before Heiter is gone for good. And so he does exactly that. In his final days, instead of pushing Fern and Frieren onto a new journey, he allows them to stay by his side, creating some final memories with the girl that would last a lifetime. And then he dies. And no, he wasn't killed by a monster in the woods, or a demon seeking revenge for their fallen lord. It wasn't an accident that could have been prevented if Frieren had been paying more attention, nor was it any way Frieren's fault. He just dies. So Frieren does the one thing she can, and she takes Fern under her wing, becoming the tired old grandma she was born to be. Because the thing is, even after experiencing the death of her closest friends, the young elf never closed herself off to forming new connections. Just like for her entire life, Frieren just has a hard time forming those connections, but she's open to them. Himmel's death didn't make her callous to the world, but it also didn't lead her to jump at the next opportunity to create a friend to replace him. At her core, Frieren knows that she is going to outlive Fern, that for all their adventures together, Fern will join Himmel and Heiter long before she does. But through Himmel, Frieren now understands the importance of being present in the moment. You may have noticed that I haven't actually talked about the plot of Frieren this entire time. I've broken down the first episode and a half, but where do the elf and the mage go from here? If there's no demon lord to kill or friends to avenge, then what are they doing? Is there anything that they're aiming for? What's their goal? What is the overarching plot of the story? What are we watching them for? Well, Frieren wants to go to heaven. In her vast span of memories, Frieren remembers a conversation she had had with a master long gone about a place in the world that connects heaven and earth. A place where spirits that have been lifted to the heavens can communicate with those still tethered to earth. So Frieren wants to go to heaven, to say one last goodbye to Himmel, a goodbye that she can be proud of, and a goodbye that she understands. And that's it. That's the plot of Frieren. There's not some overarching enemy that threatens to destroy the world. There's mini arcs along the way. Save a village here, have a talk with nobility there, but none of this is necessarily needed in order for the story to get to heaven. Frieren is truly about the adventure. It's about the journey. A journey that goes beyond where most fantasies end. The best episodes of the show is when the plot stops and nothing happens. Early on in their adventure, Frieren and Frieren come across a statue of the late Himmel, and Frieren wishes to surround him in the flowers he had loved so much when he had lived. Frieren is at peace with potentially spending years just to find a single seed, but after spending half a year searching for a flower that doesn't exist anymore, Frieren gets fed up and asks Frieren how many years is soon. But Frieren doesn't get angry at the girl. She acknowledges that she's made her worry and apologizes, realizing that she's no longer simply using up her own time, where years may as well have been the equivalent of a few days, but the time of a young girl who yearns to see the world. We see this continue countless times again and again, watching a sunrise not because Frieren finds beauty in it, but because the people she's close with do. The story of Frieren is about the experiences in life and sharing those experiences with those you care about. Nothing hits this point more than the mid-season finale of the show. Here, Frieren stalls the physical journey to visit an old friend of hers, a dwarf on his last legs who's been the defender of his village for centuries. This first half of the episode does nothing to further the plot. We don't get any closer to heaven, and we spend time in a village that's not too dissimilar from any other village we've seen before. We just spend time here. We learn about Old Man Vol's story, a story that almost made me cry, and as Frieren is on her way again, knowing that this may be the last time they meet, this would be her time to say her goodbyes, but instead, she leaves Old Man Vol with a simple,
"See you later."
This segment of the episode might be considered filler to some. While it's implied the party trained at the village, it's nothing too crazy to believe that they needed it, and we don't get any closer to reaching the series' ultimate goal. Instead, we spend our time and our adventure with an old man whose memory is a wreck, and I loved it. This is the beauty of Frieren. This is why so many people have become so endeared to this show in such a short amount of time. Sure, the incredible action sequences probably help keep some viewers locked in their seats, but the slow pacing, the beautiful setting, the characters, and the journey is what Frieren is about. And that's why it's already regarded as a genre and generation-defining classic. Not for the world-encompassing plot or the boundary-breaking animation, but for just sitting down and taking the time to look back and appreciate the memories that we have. If Frieren has taught us anything, it's that heaven truly is the friends we made along the way.